Most lives are not undone by catastrophe. They are softened by drift, by days that pass without resistance, by decisions postponed rather than made, by values admired rather than lived. The Stoic philosophers were acutely aware of this danger. They did not fear chaos alone, they feared unconsciousness. To live without examination, they believed, was not simply inefficient, it was undignified. And so they returned again and again to questions, not as an academic exercise, not as moral exhibition, but as a method of governance. For the Stoics understood something most people avoid. A life is not shaped by answers, but by the quality of the questions it tolerates. Poor questions keep the mind occupied. Good questions keep the soul honest. This reflection is built around 12 such questions, distilled from the writings of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. Questions not designed to comfort, but to orient. They are not fashionable, they do not flatter, they do not promise ease. What they offer is clarity. And clarity, once acquired, changes the way one stands in the world. Let us begin where all Stoic inquiry begins, with value. The first question appears simple enough. What do you actually value? Not in theory, not rhetorically, not in moments of aspiration, but in practice. Seneca observed that many people pursue lives assembled from borrowed priorities. They chase what is applauded rather than what is examined. Success, comfort, admiration, none of which are inherently corrupt, but all of which become tyrannical when unchosen. To value something unconsciously is to be ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius warned that the mind is gradually colored by the objects of its attention. What one esteems consistently, not occasionally, determines one's character. This question therefore demands more than an answer. It demands alignment. Look not at your ideals, but at your days. What receives your energy? What commands your time? What are you unwilling to sacrifice? These are your values, whether you approve of them or not. And until they are made explicit, life remains reactive. The second question sharpens this awareness. Who are you allowing to shape you? Human beings are not solitary creatures, no matter how independent they imagine themselves to be. We absorb attitudes, assumptions, and standards from those we spend time with, often without noticing the exchange. Seneca warned that character is quietly formed through association, not through instruction, but through exposure. This applies not only to people, but to influences of every kind. What voices occupy your attention? What narratives do you revisit? What expectations surround you? You do not need corrupt company to decline. You need only indifferent company. Those who make stagnation comfortable. Those who normalize excuse. Those who reward conformity over excellence. This question is not about condemnation. It is about trajectory. Are you being refined or diluted? Which leads naturally to the most decisive Stoic question of all. Is this within my control? Epictetus regarded this distinction as the foundation of freedom. Everything in life, he argued, falls into one of two categories: what is within your control and what is not. Most suffering arises from confusing the two. We attempt to manage reputation. We attempt to secure outcomes. We attempt to govern other people's perceptions. And in doing so, we neglect the only domain over which we have true authority: our judgments, our intentions, our conduct. The Stoic does not ask whether something is agreeable. They ask whether it is theirs to command. If it is, effort is required. If it is not, acceptance is demanded. This discipline does not make life easier. It makes it orderly. The next question shifts from philosophy to design. What does a well-lived day look like to you? Seneca observed that life is nothing more than a succession of days, and that to neglect their structure is to abandon life to chance. Many people pursue abstract ambitions, more freedom, more success, more security, yet they have never defined the daily experience these ambitions are meant to produce. So they achieve and still feel unsettled. An ideal day is not extravagant, it is intentional. How do you begin? What occupies the center of your attention? Where is your effort directed? What do you protect time for? Without this clarity, opportunity becomes indistinguishable from distraction. You accumulate obligation. You mistake motion for meaning. You confuse fullness with fulfillment. The Stoics believed life should be governed deliberately, not maximized, but aligned. Which brings us to a question that exposes motive. Are you attempting to become someone or to do something worthwhile? This distinction haunted the Stoics. One path seeks recognition. The other seeks coherence. One asks how it appears. The other asks whether it matters. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that it is possible to accomplish meaningful work without applause, and that craving admiration is often a sign of inner poverty. This question strips ambition of vanity. It asks not how impressive your life looks, but how honest it is. Closely related is another question. Who is this truly for? Every action serves a master. Sometimes it serves conscience. Sometimes it serves ego. Sometimes it serves fear. The Stoics demanded radical sincerity here. Who benefits from this choice? Whose approval are you seeking? What discomfort are you attempting to avoid? When motive is clarified, action becomes lighter. One no longer performs, one acts. The next question introduces emotional discipline. What interpretation am I placing upon this event? Epictetus insisted that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgments that disturb us. Between what occurs and how you respond lies a story. And stories can be revised. Is this truly an offense or merely a remark? Is this genuinely a failure or an adjustment? Is this permanent or passing? Stoicism does not deny emotion. It refuses to surrender judgment to it. Which leads to another essential inquiry. Is my response proportionate? The Stoics were suspicious of excess, not because emotion is undesirable, but because disproportion obscures reason. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that most provocations dissolve when viewed from a greater scale. Time reduces intensity. Perspective restores balance. This question is not repressive. It is liberating. It releases you from reacting as though every disturbance were existential. Next comes a question concerning effort. Am I committed to the work or attached to the result? Outcomes are unstable. Effort is not. Seneca warned that tying one's peace of mind to results places it at the mercy of fortune. The Stoic does not abandon aspiration. They detach it from desperation. They act fully and accept outcomes with composure. Which leads to a question that exposes resentment. What do I believe I am owed? Many grievances are born from unexamined expectation, recognition, fairness, gratitude. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that nature guarantees nothing beyond the opportunity to act honorably. This realization is sobering and strengthening. Expectation loosens its grip. Gratitude becomes possible. Which invites another question. What remains worthy of gratitude even now? Not sentiment, not performance, attention. The Stoics treated gratitude as a discipline of perception. What endures? What has been given freely? What still functions? Gratitude does not deny difficulty, it prevents blindness. The next question turns inward. Am I acting from principle or from impulse? Impulse is immediate. Principle is enduring. The Stoics cultivated the pause, the interval between urge and action. That interval is freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote that one always has the option of withholding judgment. This option preserves dignity. Finally, we arrive at a question that gathers the others. If this were repeated each day, would it form a life I could respect? Stoicism concerns itself not with isolated acts, but with patterns. Character is not declared, it is accumulated. And beneath every Stoic question lies one final inquiry, rarely stated, but always present. What answer is my life giving? Life asks continuously, not through words, but through circumstance. Meaning is not discovered, it is demonstrated. There comes a moment in a thoughtful life when accumulation ceases to be progress. More information no longer clarifies. More advice no longer steadies. More reflection no longer moves. The Stoics recognized this moment with precision. They understood that thought, when unaccompanied by action, becomes a refined form of evasion. Epictetus was unsparing in his judgment here. Philosophy, he insisted, is not a shelter from life, but a preparation for it. To think well without acting accordingly is not wisdom, it is indulgence. Thus, the Stoic questions are never ornamental, they are corrective. They reveal the distance between what one professes and what one permits. The next question confronts this distance directly. What am I presently avoiding? Avoidance rarely announces itself as fear. More often, it masquerades as diligence, as research, as preparation. Seneca observed that delay is frequently the result not of incapacity, but of reluctance. To act is to remove ambiguity. To remove ambiguity is to accept consequence. Avoidance preserves possibility. Action accepts reality. What conversation is being postponed? What responsibility is being deferred? What truth is being softened until it becomes unrecognizable? Avoidance is not neutral. It extracts a quiet toll in attention, in self-respect, in inner coherence. The Stoics regarded courage not as the absence of fear, but as the refusal to grant fear authority. Which leads to the next inquiry. How would this appear if approached with courage rather than convenience? Convenience is persuasive. It suggests that conditions will improve, that certainty will arrive, that timing will become ideal. The Stoics rejected this illusion. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that one should not act as though granted unlimited time. Urgency, for the Stoic, was not haste, it was respect. Respect for finitude, respect for opportunity, respect for duty. This question alters the nature of difficulty. It replaces the desire for ease with the demand for integrity. Another Stoic question addresses emotional interpretation. What meaning am I assigning to this event? Epictetus maintained that events themselves are mute. They carry no judgment until the mind supplies one. Between occurrence and emotion lies interpretation, and interpretation is subject to revision. Is this a personal slight or an incidental remark? Is this a definitive failure or a temporary impediment? Is this injustice or inconvenience? Stoicism does not deny feeling. It refuses to surrender reason to it. Which brings us to a further refinement. Is my response proportionate to the reality of the situation? The Stoics viewed disproportion as a form of distortion. Excessive anger inflates insult. Excessive fear magnifies uncertainty. Excessive desire exaggerates importance. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to view events from a greater altitude, to consider their scale against time, mortality, and the vast indifference of nature. Perspective restores measure. This question is not about suppression, it is about clarity. Next, the Stoics turn their attention to effort. Am I devoted to the task or attached to the outcome? Outcomes fluctuate. Effort does not. Seneca warned that peace of mind tethered to result is peace held hostage. The Stoic pursues excellence in action, not guarantees in consequence. They commit fully. They release expectation. This posture preserves both ambition and equanimity. Another question confronts entitlement. What do I believe should have been different? Resentment often arises not from harm, but from violated expectation. Recognition withheld, fairness denied, effort unnoticed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the world owes nothing beyond the opportunity to act justly. This recognition does not embitter, it fortifies. Expectation loosens its grip. Gratitude becomes possible. Which invites the next question. What remains worthy of gratitude in this moment? Not as an emotional exercise, as an act of attention. The Stoics regarded gratitude as a discipline of sight. What functions? What endures? What has been granted without demand? Gratitude does not deny difficulty, it corrects blindness. The next question introduces moral consistency. Am I acting from principle or from impulse? Impulse seeks relief. Principle seeks coherence. The Stoics cultivated the pause, the deliberate suspension between urge and action. Within that pause lies freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote that one retains the option to withhold assent, even in provocation. This option preserves dignity. Another question moves from the individual to the social. How am I contributing to the lives of others? Stoicism has often been misunderstood as austere or solitary. In truth, it is profoundly civic. Marcus Aurelius insisted that human beings are constituted for cooperation. A life well lived is one that benefits the whole, not through spectacle, but through reliability. This question reframes success, not what one acquires, but what one strengthens. Trust, stability, fairness. Such contributions are quiet. They are also indispensable. The next question addresses consumption. What am I allowing to occupy my mind? The Stoics believed the mind should be treated with the same discernment as the body. Not everything available is nourishing. What do you absorb daily? What narratives do you revisit? What voices shape your inner dialogue? Consumption, unchecked, shapes perception. Perception shapes action. This question restores selectivity. Next, the Stoics turn toward adversity. What is this difficulty instructing me in? Epictetus compared life to a training ground. Resistance, he argued, is not obstruction, it is formation. This question transforms hardship. Instead of asking why it has arrived, the Stoic asks what it develops. Endurance, patience, judgment. Adversity becomes formative rather than corrosive. Another question exposes self-deception. What excuse am I presently defending? Excuses preserve comfort. They also preserve limitation. The Stoics regarded self-deception as the gravest error because it prevents correction. This question is not gentle. It is necessary. What narrative absolves you of responsibility? Once exposed, excuses lose authority. Another question concerns legacy. If my life were observed closely, what would appear to matter most to me? Not declared values, demonstrated ones. Marcus Aurelius wrote that character is revealed not in intention, but in habit. This question restores alignment. It demands congruence between belief and behavior. Finally, the Stoics arrive at a question that binds the rest. If this day were repeated indefinitely, would it constitute a life of dignity? Stoicism is not concerned with isolated acts. It concerns itself with patterns, and patterns sustained become character. Character sustained becomes destiny. At a certain depth of reflection, Stoic questions cease to feel instructional. They become confrontational. Not because they accuse, but because they refuse to allow evasion. This is the point at which Stoicism stops offering improvement and begins demanding transformation. The Stoics understood that clarity, once achieved, is inconvenient. It cannot be unseen, and once seen, it requires response. One of the most sobering questions they returned to repeatedly was this: how much time do I truly have? Not as speculation, not as anxiety, as orientation. Seneca observed that people behave as though time were an inexhaustible resource. They defend property fiercely, yet allow hours, days, and years to dissipate without resistance. Time, he warned, is not squandered dramatically. It is surrendered quietly. Through distraction mistaken for rest, through postponement disguised as prudence, through living as though later were guaranteed. The Stoics did not meditate on mortality to darken the spirit. They did so to sharpen it. When finitude is acknowledged, triviality loses its authority. The question reshapes ambition. What, under the condition of limited time, remains worthy of effort? What loses significance entirely? From this awareness emerges another inquiry. What am I treating as permanent that is, by nature, provisional? Status shifts, bodies decline, circumstances alter without consultation. The Stoics warned that suffering intensifies when impermanent things are mistaken for stable foundations. Attachment becomes expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. Entitlement becomes resentment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything he possessed, health, position, relationships, was on loan. This recognition did not diminish gratitude, it purified it. To value without clinging is not detachment, it is maturity. The next question presses this recognition further. Am I living as though another opportunity is assured? Many lives are governed by delay, conversations postponed, courage deferred, meaningful work relegated to some undefined future. Stoicism confronts this assumption directly. Epictetus insisted that life does not wait for readiness, it responds to action. This question introduces seriousness, not severity, seriousness. If this opportunity passes unused, what replaces it? Which leads to a question about regret. What will trouble me more, having acted and failed, or having remained passive? The Stoics observed that regret most often follows inaction. Failure instructs, avoidance corrodes. Seneca argued that even unsuccessful effort strengthens character, while hesitation weakens it. This question does not encourage recklessness. It encourages resolve. resolve guided by principle rather than fear. Another Stoic question examines the slow construction of character. Who am I becoming through repetition? Character, the Stoics believed, is not forged in crisis alone. It is shaped in routine. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul takes the shape of what it repeatedly contemplates and performs. Habits are formative. They incline one toward patience or irritability, toward discipline or indulgence, toward courage or avoidance. This question eliminates abstraction. It asks you to observe yourself not in moments of resolve, but in ordinary days. The next question addresses inner governance. How do I speak to myself when I fall short? The Stoics were demanding, but not cruel. They distinguished discipline from self-contempt. Epictetus warned against becoming both judge and executioner of oneself. Harsh inner speech does not produce excellence. It produces distortion. This question restores proportion. Would you speak to a respected colleague in this manner? If not, why permit such speech toward yourself? Another inquiry challenges conventional measures of success. What does it mean, for me, to prevail? For many, prevailing means recognition, advancement, advantage. The Stoics proposed a quieter metric. To prevail was to preserve character under pressure, to act justly when injustice was expedient, to remain composed when provoked, to resist corruption when reward beckoned. Marcus Aurelius wrote that one may be defeated externally and remain undefeated within. This question reframes ambition. Victory is no longer comparative, it is internal. The next Stoic question concerns influence. What effect does my presence have on others? The Stoics recognize that emotional states are contagious. A person either steadies their surroundings or unsettles them. Do others leave interactions with you clearer or more agitated, more grounded or more reactive? This question introduces responsibility without moral exhibition. It asks for awareness. Another inquiry introduces humility. Where might my certainty be misplaced? The Stoics distrusted rigid conviction. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that even deeply held beliefs require examination. This question preserves intellectual integrity. It protects against dogmatism. It keeps wisdom supple. The next question examines fairness. Am I granting others the understanding I reserve for myself? Many judge themselves by intention and others by outcome. The Stoics insisted on symmetry. To demand grace while denying it is incoherent. This question tempers judgment. It restores justice to perception. Another inquiry concerns simplicity. What am I unnecessarily complicating? Complexity often masquerades as sophistication. Yet the Stoics valued simplicity because it clarifies action. What could be reduced? What could be removed? What could be decided once, rather than endlessly reconsidered? This question restores momentum. The next question addresses discomfort. What would I attempt if inconvenience were removed as an obstacle? The Stoics observed that most people are not restrained by danger, but by discomfort. This question exposes that truth, and it invites courage. Another inquiry returns to patience. Am I allowing this to unfold at its proper pace? The Stoics trusted process. They understood that meaningful development is gradual and often invisible. This question guards against despair. Finally, we approach one of the most exacting Stoic questions. If today were preserved as an example, would it be worth following? Marcus Aurelius believed leadership was demonstrated, not proclaimed. One teaches constantly, through conduct, restraint, and choice. This question demands integrity, and it brings the Stoic inquiry toward synthesis. Stoicism does not offer answers to be recited. It offers questions to be lived alongside, questions that refine judgment, questions that discipline desire, questions that restore proportion. They do not promise comfort, they promise clarity. And clarity, once attained, changes the terms on which life is lived. At a certain stage, Stoicism ceases to feel like a philosophy one studies. It becomes a posture one inhabits, not as a badge of identity, not as a system to defend, but as a manner of standing in the world, composed, attentive, and governed. The Stoic philosophers never intended to provide consolation. They offered orientation. Marcus Aurelius did not write to be remembered. He wrote to remain lucid, to correct his own drift, to steady himself when authority, expectation, and circumstance threatened to distort judgment. That discipline, quiet, relentless, unadorned, is the essence of Stoicism. It does not promise ease. It does not offer immunity from loss. It does not shield one from disappointment. What it offers is coherence. Coherence between belief and behavior, between intention and action, between inner principle and outward conduct. And coherence, sustained over time, becomes integrity. Integrity is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not require recognition. But it is unmistakable. It appears in restraint when provocation would justify excess, in fairness when advantage would excuse compromise, in patience when haste would be rewarded. The Stoics regarded such integrity as the highest achievement available to a human being, not success, not influence, not admiration. Integrity. Because integrity cannot be taken, it cannot be bestowed, it cannot be revoked by fortune. It is cultivated, daily, quietly, without spectacle. This cultivation begins with acceptance, a word frequently misunderstood. Stoic acceptance is not resignation. It is accuracy. It is the refusal to argue with what is, so that effort may be directed toward what can be shaped. Epictetus insisted that suffering arises not from events, but from resistance to inevitability. Acceptance frees attention. It releases energy trapped in resentment, denial, and futile protest. And in that release, agency returns. The Stoic acts fully, without illusion, without entitlement, without demand, without bitterness. They invest in effort, not outcome. And this posture restores dignity to action itself. Dignity, in Stoic thought, is inseparable from responsibility. Responsibility not for outcomes, which remain uncertain, but for conduct, which remains one's own. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you need not master complexity, you need only govern yourself within it. This governance is not rigid, it is responsive. It allows for grief without collapse, for joy without dependence, for ambition without desperation. It produces a steadiness that does not fluctuate with circumstance, and steadiness in turbulent environments becomes influence. Not the influence of authority, the influence of example. People trust those who do not exaggerate, who do not escalate, who do not abandon principle under pressure. The Stoics understood that one teaches constantly, whether one intends to or not, through tone, through restraint, through choice. A composed individual stabilizes their surroundings. A reactive individual destabilizes them. This is not moral judgment, it is observation, which is why Stoicism places such emphasis on attention. Attention to impulse, attention to interpretation, attention to habit, because whatever escapes attention governs behavior, and whatever governs behavior shapes a life. The Stoics believed that most lives are not ruined by tragedy. They are diluted by negligence. By allowing days to pass without intention, by tolerating small compromises, by confusing movement with direction. Stoic questions exist to interrupt that dilution. They do not accuse, they clarify. They return one again and again to first principles. What matters? What is mine to command? What kind of person am I becoming through repetition? These questions do not seek perfect answers. They seek honest engagement. Stoicism does not demand flawlessness. It demands seriousness. Seriousness about how one lives. Seriousness about how one treats others. Seriousness about how one spends the finite substance of time. Time, the Stoics reminded themselves, is not merely passing. It is being spent, and how it is spent determines the quality of the life it becomes. Seneca warned that life is long enough if it is well used. The problem is not duration, it is dispersion, attention scattered, effort diluted, values unexamined. Stoicism gathers what has been scattered. It restores proportion. It reveals that many anxieties are exaggerated, that many desires are borrowed, that many fears dissolve under scrutiny. And what remains is simpler: effort, judgment, character. The Stoics believed that when these are governed well, life, though still uncertain, becomes intelligible. Not predictable, intelligible. One understands what one is responsible for and what one is not. And in that understanding, peace emerges. Not the peace of escape, the peace of alignment. Alignment between what you know and how you act, between what you value and what you protect, between who you believe yourself to be and who you are becoming. This alignment does not require withdrawal from life. It demands engagement on disciplined terms. It allows one to participate fully without being consumed, to care deeply without clinging, to strive without losing balance. This is the quiet achievement Stoicism points toward, not control over life, but command of oneself within it. If you have remained with these reflections, it suggests more than passing curiosity. It suggests discernment, a willingness to consider not merely how to live effectively, but how to live honorably. If this inquiry has proven worthwhile, you may choose to continue it. Not impulsively, not habitually, deliberately. You may subscribe, not as allegiance, but as a means of remaining in thoughtful company. You may share this with one person whose judgment you respect, not to persuade, but to invite reflection. And if you choose to leave a considered comment, you do more than respond. You participate in a tradition of serious exchange, one that values clarity over noise and reflection over reaction. Such contributions sustain discourse, and discourse, when conducted with care, sustains culture. Whatever you decide, remember this: you need not conquer circumstance. You need only meet it with character. That task is demanding, and it is sufficient.